the things you want to ask yourself is that, what is the purpose of setting up a society that offers maximal equality of opportunity? And one of the answers is that you maximize people's free choice. And if you maximize free choice, then you also maximize differences in choice between people. And so you can't have both of those.
But of course it will have differences in choice, of course, because we are human beings. But I can't see why it differs between me and Skavlan, for instance. But of course it differs in biological things, but not in choices, because I think more how we raise them, how we live, education, a sort of culture, attitudes form a human being, whether or not they are a girl or a boy when they grow up. Mm-hmm. And if I raise my daughter to become a leader, to be self-confident, to have a high education, for instance, I think she will have a good platform to become a civil engineer, to become a CEO of a company, or to become a nurse.
Well, that is what people who think that the differences between people who are primarily culturally constructed believe, but it's not what the evidence suggests.
Okay, we don't agree on that.
It's all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
I worked for a UN committee for 2 years on sustainable economic and ecological development, and read a very large amount during that period of time and learned a lot, much of which made me much more optimistic than I had been before I read the relevant literature, which was a real shock to me. But the climate change issue is an absolutely catastrophic, nightmarish mess, and the idea that that will unite us is that's not going to unite us. I mean, first of all, it's very difficult to separate the science from the politics, and second, even if the claims, the more radical claims, are true, we have no idea what to do about it. And so, no. And besides, it's even worse than that. Here's one of the worst things about the whole mess is, so as you project outwards with regards to your climate change projections, which are quite unreliable to begin with, and the unreliability of the measurement magnifies as you move forward in time, obviously, because the errors accumulate. And so if you go out 50 years, the error bars around the projections are already so wide that we won't be able to measure the positive or negative effects of anything we do right now. So how in the world are you going to solve a problem when you can't even measure the consequence of your actions? Like, how is that even possible? And besides that, well, what's the solution? What are we going to do? Switch to wind and solar? Well, good luck with that. Just try it and see what happens. We can't store the power. Germany tried it. They produced more carbon dioxide than they did when they started because they had to turn on their coal-fired plants again. That wasn't a very good plan. Well, we don't want nuclear. It's like, okay, what happens at night? The sun goes down. Well, isn't that something we should have taken into account? Well, we got to flip on the coal-fired plants. Well, so it was a complete catastrophe, and all that happened was the price of electricity shot up. It was like zero utility. That's not a solution. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we should cut back. We can't consume as much as we are all consuming. It's like, well, maybe, except the data that I've read indicate that if you can get the GDP of people up to about $5,000 a year, then they start caring about the environment, and the environment cleans up. So you could make a perfectly strong case, I think, and a reasonable one, perhaps even a humane one, that the actual idea would be to get everybody in the world who's poor, desperately so, out of poverty as fast as possible, which would increase consumption in the short term, because then they'd start to care about the environment and things would clean up. It's like, okay, well, what are we going to do about global warming? Well, good luck figuring that out. I don't see a solution on the horizon. I look at Bjorn Lomborg's work. I really like Bjorn Lomborg. I think he's a real genius. You can look him up if you want. He took the UN millennial goals. There's 200 of them. That's way too many goals if you're serious about goals, by the way, because 200 goals isn't a plan. It's a wish list. You have to prioritize. I'm serious. You have to prioritize. But they won't prioritize because each of the goals has its constituents. And if you prioritize, then you irritate the constituents. But if you don't prioritize, then you can't implement the plan. So what Lomborg did was gather a teams of economists, multiple teams, some of whom were Nobel Prize-winning economists. He had them assemble teams. He had them rank order development goals in terms of their return on investment, all of the teams. Then he averaged across the teams and came up with a final list. And addressing global warming wasn't even on the list. The most fundamental, he wrote a book called How to Spend $75 Billion to Make the World a Better Place, and that's not very much money on a global scale. Almost everything that he recommended had to do with increased child nutrition in developing countries. It's like, these things are complicated, man. These are complicated. It's like, well, let's fix global warming. It's like, okay, well, good luck with that. First of all, how are you going to do that? And to think that will unite us, but certainly not uniting us so far. So, no. And it's the kind of low-resolution thinking that just gets us absolutely nowhere. I like what Lomborg did way better. I think it's way more intelligent. So, you know, maybe if you increase child nutrition enough and you produce another, I don't know, 10 million geniuses as a consequence of that, and maybe one of them will figure out what to do about global warming. Well, I'm serious about that, you know? It's not a bad thing to increase the total sum of human brain power, you know? And so we treat these things so lightly. Well, let's fix the planet. Well, we're going to concentrate on global warming. Well, why global warming? Well, because everyone thinks that's the biggest catastrophe. Well, maybe it is, but if you don't have a solution, well, and then what about all those other problems? What are you going to do about them? Well, we'll ignore them because we can feel good about, you know, being concerned about global warming. It's like, you know, one of the reasons there's more trees in the Northern Hemisphere than there were 100 years ago. No one knows that, but it's true, and by a substantial margin. You know why, in part? Because people burned coal instead of wood. It's like everyone says, well, we shouldn't burn coal. It's like, okay, fair enough. What do you want to do? Burn trees instead? Because that's what poor people would have done. It's like, coal isn't good. Well, it's better than burning wood. So these things are complicated. So they're unbelievably complicated. And so, no, it's not going to unite us. And we're not going to do a damn thing about it either. So it doesn't really matter. So, well, what are we going to do? You're going to stop, like, having heat? You're going to stop having electricity? You're going to stop driving your cars? You're going to stop taking trains? It's like, you're going to stop using your iPhones? You're not going to do any of that. And no wonder. So, no.
That if you feminize men, you might give men more of a allure to fascist ideologies.
There's no might about that.
No,
you're
saying it will, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's an old psychoanalytic dictum that anything that you repress comes back with a vengeance. So, for example, if you pretend that you're not afraid of something, that actually makes you more afraid of it. And it's not a good pathway forward. If you suppress your anger and you lie about it, then all it does is move down into the lower, stay down in the lower reaches of your psyche, as any reasonable developmental psychologist figured out like 70 years ago.
What do you think attracts people to your ideas or your book?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing is that it actually does matter to me, for what that's worth, personally, that each person puts their life together. I actually believe that there isn't anything more important that anyone can do, and there isn't anything more important that I can facilitate. And it makes sense because I am a clinical psychologist and a professor, and if you joined those together, it's kind of what you'd expect.
Do you think there's a misconception that you're against equality of opportunity? That there's a misconception that your debate...
Purposeful misconception. Yeah. So, and it's not surprising, you know, because I went after the collectivist leftists pretty hard right from the beginning, and I don't have any regrets about that. But it's perfectly reasonable for them in response to say, well, what if he's an extremist? Because that's one possibility. It happens not to be true, because you could be anywhere except on the extreme left and object to extreme leftist collectivist policies. And the Richard Spencer, I think it's Richard, whoever the white supremacist character is, the ethno-nationalist, you know, he's not the least bit happy with me, and neither are his followers, and for good reason, because I'm no fan of ethnocentrism on the right any more than I am on the left. And they use a collectivist doctrine as well. They just use it in the opposite manner that the leftist collectivists use it. Like the radical right guys think of me as a Jewish shill, for God's sake. You know, and there's lots of anti-Semitic comments that are aimed at me on my YouTube channel and so forth. And so that's fine. You know, if people are foolish enough to take that tack, well, you know, the moral burden is going to fall on them.
Sweden's Foreign Minister Margot Wallström said that you should crawl back to the stone you came from, and she couldn't believe that so many people listened to you.
If she had done more than merely read the second-hand opinions of ideologically possessed journalists, then she might have thought, she might have had some second thoughts. I did invite her to one of the lectures so she could come out and find out for herself. But as far as I can tell, she didn't attend, and perhaps she had something better to do. It's certainly possible. But I see no evidence whatsoever that she knew anything at all about what she was talking about. And I would also suggest that someone in her position of authority and reputation be somewhat more careful about bandying about casual insults in relationship to people she knows absolutely nothing about.
Do you think that says anything about her as a foreign minister, or does it say something about your ideas that she said these things?
I think it has something to do with her being willing to make statements without having sufficiently done the difficult task of doing the investigation necessary to justify such things. And I would say that when you're in a position that she's in, that you're required ethically, morally, and as a consequence of whatever wisdom you might have developed, to be very, very careful about what you say and why. Because the notion is that there's something intrinsically toxic about masculinity that manifests itself in the patriarchal tyranny, which is a set of concepts that I detest completely, and that therefore men have to be radically altered in their essence, starting right from early childhood, or we're going to get more of the same tyrannical structure. And I think that that's ungrateful and one-sided and hateful to an extreme that that is so deep that it's very, very deep, and it doesn't manifest its full malevolent nature on the surface.